Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 660. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about street art and food walks, canals, factories, and the Industrial Revolution as we go to Manchester, England.
I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Manchester. I'd like to welcome to the show Helena Ringstrom from fountainoftravel.com, who has come to talk to us about Manchester in England. Helena, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And we're quickly going to be able to tell that you don't have a Manchester accent. So you are not from Manchester originally, but it is where you live now.
Yes, so I'm originally from Sweden, and I moved to Manchester just shy of 8 years ago. Came here to study originally, graduated sort of 5 years ago, and I'm just working in the city now. So really love the city, been here quite a long time, so pretty excited about today, to be honest.
Excellent. And because you're originally a Swedish speaker, we know that I already butchered your last name, but let me give you one chance to say your last name the correct way.
Sure. So in Swedish, you say Ringström, but there you go. It's not the easiest for English speakers.
Okay. Excellent. And I've tried that a couple times before we started recording and failed. So we're going to go on. Why should someone go to Manchester in England?
So I think when people think of England, they very often think of quite historical cities. You know, you have the likes of sort of York or Chester. You've got really old history. And I think Manchester isn't like that. I think Manchester didn't actually become a city until 1853. So it's actually a quite young city. And I think even today you can really tell that Manchester's a young city. It's got a quite modern history in the sense that there wasn't really much happening in Manchester until the Industrial Revolution. Well, It was pretty much what led the Industrial Revolution as a city. And I think for sort of modern day visitors, you have that sort of combination of the industrial history, but then you also have a really young spirit in the city itself. So it's very much regenerating at the moment. You have a lot of new food establishments opening up. You have a lot of students. It's a big university city. Obviously, you have the football, which I'm sure everyone loves. I'm not a huge fan. And yeah, you just have that sort of juxtaposition of old and new, and it just makes it a really interesting place to visit.
Excellent. Well, where would you start us when we get to Manchester?
I think you could quite easily spend 5 days maybe in the city centre and then do a couple of day trips. So you could definitely do sort of a week in Manchester.
Okay.
I think one of my favourite areas of the city is a place called Northern Quarter. So Northern Quarter is not a massive area. It's sort of zero point 0.3 square kilometres. So it's quite a small area of the city centre. But it's very much famous for being sort of the hub for independent businesses and sort of vintage fashion, record stores. You have loads of sort of cafes and a bar culture going on. And just to sort of give you an idea what it would look like, it's very often used as a filming location to represent New York, sort of back in the day. Fire escapes and the red brick buildings. And it's
okay.
So we've actually had, I don't know if you know, but there's a movie coming up called Morbius. I think it's like a Spider-Man spin-off, and that's actually been filmed in Manchester. That was only in the last couple of months. Yeah, it's a quite interesting area of the city. It's a fun area of the city, especially if you're a little bit younger. It's also famous for its street art. So Manchester in general, you do have quite a lot of street art, and it's sort of an interesting aspect of the city, I suppose. But in Northern Quarter specifically, a few years ago, there was a project called Cities of Hope. So it's basically, Cities of Hope is this organisation that allows street artists to showcase their work. The only thing is that it has to have a link to social issues. Okay. So as part of this project, they had basically the 17 pieces of work around Manchester, but most of them are, well, actually I think the majority are in Northern Quarter. So it's sort of about people on the fringe of society, it's about homelessness, it's about war, minorities. And it's just really interesting to sort of walk around the city and have a look.
Well, and are there better ways to access just the street art in particular? Are there street art tours, for instance, in Manchester that you would recommend?
I do believe there are some.
Okay.
Couldn't recommend one because I have never been on one.
Okay.
I have been on a food tour, however, and that was actually a really good introduction to Northern Quarter as an area.
Okay.
So it's a company called Manchester Food Walks.
Okay.
So it's basically this guy called John, and he takes you on a tour of Northern Quarter, but you don't just try the food. He actually gives you a lot of history about the area, and he does show you some of the street art as well. So yeah, it's a quite interesting way to sort of get an introduction.
Excellent. Well, I love a good food tour, so.
I know, so do I. A few more sort of things to do in Northern Quarter. You have a place called Affleck's Palace. So it's basically a multi-storey building that was established in the sort of 1980s, but if you want something quirky and weird and wonderful, that's kind of where you should go in Manchester, really. It's one of these, I think the name pretty much is all palace. I mean, you walk around, there's all these little nooks and crannies, and you always seem to find a new shop that you didn't even know was there to begin with. It's quite a fun shopping experience, even if it's not your style. But it's lots of independent business.
So Affleck's, and I understand they're no longer using Affleck's Palace officially, but so it's an indoor market then?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you do have, it's all indoors. I think it's about 4 or 5 floors.
Okay.
But they are sort of independent little business units, so it's kind of like small shops within the shop.
Okay.
More than a market, I'd say. But yeah, it's just all independent businesses, so it's quite fun. Just walk around, you get a lot of sort of vintage clothing. There's a cereal cafe.
And do you have a favorite one or two in Affleck's?
I don't know the names. I think it's one of those places where you don't necessarily know the name.
Okay. What do they sell though? What are we looking for?
Literally everything. You can get some record stores, so you can get, if you want vinyl. You have vintage shops.
Okay.
You have small label businesses of clothing. I think there's one place that sells American sweets.
Okay.
Don't know why you'd go to England for that.
I don't know why I would go to England for that. England's got some pretty good sweets on its own. Okay.
There's a beads shop, and there's also, I believe, a quite recent addition is the Manchester store. So I don't know if you know, but the bee is the symbol of Manchester, and you'll find that dotted throughout the city. So if you look in sort of the rubbish bin, you'll see the little bee symbol.
Okay.
Because of the attack that we had a couple of years ago, this kind of even more so become this symbol of the city. And this store opened up on the ground floor of Affleck's, where you can get the T-shirts and probably not intended to be souvenirs, but a lot of products would just be symbol on. So that's kind of under Affleck's Palace.
Okay. Excellent. And goes back
Well,
apparently to the Industrial Revolution and worker bees. Okay.
started as a coat of arms in 1842. So it's supposed to represent community and hard work. So yeah, like you said, Industrial Revolution.
Excellent. And where are we going next?
Once you sort of had a look around Northern Quarter during daytime, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned before, Northern Quarter is really good for sort of bars. Maybe have a sort of quick dinner in a place called Mackinac. So Mackinac is an indoor food market. It's in a Grade 2 listed building, so it's a beautiful venue. It's only been open a couple of years, but it's sort of an indoor market where you have communal benches in the middle and then you order food and it's sort of delivered to your table. So once you've done that, then you can sort of go for your night out in Northern Quarter. So one quite new addition to the area is a place called NQ64. So it's a sort of basement bar where you can play retro arcade games, Nintendo, Pac-Man, things like that. So it's quite a fun night out. And if you wanted something a little bit classier, there's a lovely bar in the basement of a place called Evelyn's Cafe and Bar. So there's a lovely retro cocktail bar with table service called the Daisy in the basement. That's a lovely place to go as well.
Okay.
If you did want to go sort of further afield than Northern Quarter on your first day, you could go to a place called Ancoats. So Ancoats is a small area northeast of Northern Quarter, literally just across the main road and you're kind of in Ancoats. But it's becoming famous recently because it's regenerating and it's a lot of sort of new bars and food places. Mm-hmm. So when I first moved here, say 8 years ago, no one was really speaking about Ancoats as such, but in the last few years, it's definitely on the rise. So you just see more and more places opening up.
Well, and you talk about renovating. I think we haven't really said, but a number of the places you've named so far, as I'm looking at the pictures of them, are these lovely old buildings from the 1800s that Mackie Mayer, for instance, is a beautiful building architecturally. I would say Art Deco kind of style would be my guess at how to categorize that have been refurnished into this marketplace. So it seems like there's the theme going on here in Manchester. Okay, excellent. So they've got that industrial heritage and they're not throwing it away and building brand new buildings, but they're reusing those old brick and industrial buildings. Excellent.
Well, it's sort of a mix, to be honest.
Okay.
Like you said, loads of absolutely gorgeous buildings. I mean, my dream is to live in a regenerated mill because they do beautiful flats in them. But yeah, you do have a lot of sort of old mills that are now being repurposed, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. That said, though, you do have areas of Manchester that are becoming a lot more modern and have a lot of glass and quite a lot of skyscrapers are being built at the moment. So I think it's the kind of what I said in the introduction, is really that sort of juxtaposition of the old and the new that's happening at the moment. But I mean, I just love the old red brick buildings and me there. Manchester.
Okay, so you're taking us to the older neighborhoods.
Yeah, for now.
But if you wanted to, we'll get to some of the newer ones. Okay.
Yeah, there are new areas as well, but personally, I think these older ones that are being regenerated are definitely my favourite areas for the reasons that you just mentioned. Beautiful architecture and a lot happening. But yeah, so just finishing off in Ancoats, I was just going to mention, so one quite nice place to go in Ancoats is that they actually have a microbrewery called Seven Brothers. So again, it's sort of an independent local business that's quite nice to support. Mm-hmm. You could easily spend a full day doing all of the things I've just mentioned. Okay. I suppose on the next day, you might want to explore this sort of industrial heritage that we talked about. So one of my favourite museums in Manchester is called Museum of Science and Industry. Mm-hmm. So it's actually built on the site of the world's first passenger railway station. Okay. So as I mentioned before, Manchester was sort of at the forefront of, well, industrial revolution, if you like. This railway station used to go between Manchester and Liverpool and was the first for passengers. This opened in 1830, and now they built this museum. So obviously that's a small part of it, the fact that it's on this site. But basically, there's this interactive museum, and I think it's 5 different buildings. And they basically cover everything about the Industrial Revolution, pretty much. So you have one section focusing on the cotton industry, which is really what sort of catapulted Manchester to fame, if you like. I think I read a stat, actually, that at one point they processed 65% of the world's cotton, which is insane figure, really, when you think about it.
Right.
So that's a huge part of how Manchester basically became a city. So that's one section. You have a section where they talk about the sort of the machinery that's used, steam trains. You have one section dedicated to aviation. So you've got loads of planes inside. It's quite interesting. It's a hangar. And then finally, you have a section that's about the conditions that Manchester's population were living in. So obviously, as I mentioned, Manchester just had this massive boom and it grew really, really fast. But really, the conditions that people were living in was just awful. I mean, you had all these people working in the mills, and it's quite a poor place, to be honest. It wasn't a very pleasant place to live, essentially, and that's kind of what this museum covers.
Now, you mentioned aviation. I mean, I love aviation museums, but I don't know why Manchester. Is there a connection to aviation that I'm unaware of with Manchester?
To be honest, I don't think it's really the main purpose of the museum. I don't think Manchester's really a massive aviation destination as such.
Okay.
I just think they put it there to tie it in with the rest of industry and production, if you like. Okay. But no, I don't think there's an obvious connection between Manchester and aviation. I wouldn't say so.
Well, it looks like one of the early aviation designers was from there, but it's not a name I know. Okay. Excellent. Where to next?
The next one is a bit of a quirky thing. It's something I did quite recently for the first time. So basically, there is a thing called the Crystal Maze. So the Crystal Maze is next to the Museum of Science and Industry. And basically what it is, it was a popular game show in the 90s. And it was led by this really eccentric guy called Richard O'Brien. So it's a game show where you're in teams of 8. And one person will go into a room to try and solve a problem. It can be physical, mental, just sort of a problem, essentially. And they have to collect a crystal. And then you collect as many crystals as you can. And then at the end, they put you in a sort of, I don't know how to call it, a massive fan where there's gold papers flying around. You're supposed to collect as many as possible, and then you get a score. So that's kind of the concept of it.
Okay.
And what they've done now, because obviously it was in the 90s, but what they've done now is that in London and Manchester, the only 2 places in the country where you can do this, they've basically made this game show come to life. So they've set everything up, all these rooms where you can go in and solve problems, and literally you're living the game show. And this is something you can do when you come to Manchester. So, like I said, it's a bit of a quirky thing to do.
So it's almost like an escape room, but on steroids.
Yeah, a little bit.
With the problem-solving part of it. Okay.
So, yeah, it's a quite fun thing to do. And like I said, you can only do it in 2 places in the country. So when you're here, you might as well give it a go, because it's fun.
Okay.
And, it breaks up the history a little bit. You can do something quirky. So when you're done with that, you collect your crystals quite close to where both these buildings are. You can go and have a look at a reconstruction of Roman ruins. So even though Manchester didn't develop a lot until the Industrial Revolution, it was actually a Roman fort originally, and it was called Mamucium. So it's not really a great deal to look at, but there is a reconstruction. I've been told that a couple of the stones are original, but I couldn't tell you which ones they are. But it's just interesting to go and have a little read. There's sort of a little information sign you can have a look at. It's a nice little place. When you're in the area, you might as well go and have a look.
Okay.
Once you've done that, you can step off for lunch in a place called Albert Schloss. So it's a German restaurant. They have a bit of a Alpine theme, but it's a lovely restaurant, really nice food, and it's in the area, so it's a good option. Once you've had your lunch, you should head over to John Ryland's library. So whenever I've got people coming over to Manchester, this is usually the first place I take them, because I just think it's such a beautiful building. Basically, John Ryland owned the largest textile concern in the UK towards the end of the 19th century.
Okay.
And because of that, he was Manchester's first multimillionaire. So when he died, his widow opened this library in 1900s. And, I mean, it just looks like it's been plucked out of a Harry Potter film. I mean, it's absolutely
I would have gone
gorgeous.
With cathedral.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I suppose that's a...
like a Gothic cathedral turned into a library. Yeah, it's pretty stunning.
It is a beautiful building, absolutely beautiful.
It's the library that Harry Potter wanted.
Yeah, Harry Potter's jealous. So once you've had a look there, you could finish off your day by going over to Manchester Cathedral. Mm-hmm. Manchester Cathedral's been around since the 1200s, and it was very heavily damaged during the World War II Blitz. in 1940s. So a lot of the stained glass windows broke. So what it did was, instead of just putting in exactly the same design, they installed contemporary designs instead. So one of my favourites is sort of towards the back of the cathedral, and it's called A Fire Window by Margaret, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, Traherne. And it's basically commemorates the rebuilding of the cathedral. But yeah, you've got some quite beautiful stained glass windows. It's not a huge cathedral. I've been to quite a lot of cathedrals in Europe, and it's not massive. But I think the stained glass windows is quite interesting because obviously a lot of cathedrals don't really do that. They still have originals.
And when you say the fire window, this is a window made to look like there's a big fire outside.
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Okay.
So it's
in commemoration of the destruction. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think it's more about commemorating the rebuilding.
The rebuilding,
yeah,
sure,
sort of,
but that makes sense.
Sort of links to the Blitz, of course, yeah. That would pretty much fill up a day for you as well, all those activities. And they're all, again, all within walking distance of each other. And then I think you should take a day to travel out of the city centre slightly. So in South Manchester, you can get there by the bus. That's the best way to get there, unless you want to take a cab. There's sort of a cluster of sites around the university area.
Okay.
I think I mentioned before there are 4 main universities in Manchester, but 2 of them are in the sort of city centre. So you have the University of Manchester, who also own a lot of buildings, including John Rylands Library that I mentioned earlier. And then you also have the Manchester Metropolitan University. So they're the 2 big ones. And they're both located next to each other in South Manchester. So you can take the bus, and one of the first ones should be the Manchester Museum. So again, this is owned by the University of Manchester. It's basically focuses on natural history. It's undergoing refurbishment at the moment, but it will be reopened.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just natural history. So you have a sort of Egyptian section, you have some fossils, minerals, nature. It's a quite nice little museum. That's on university grounds as well, so you can see the main university grounds when you're there. Another site that's within the area is the Whitworth. So the Whitworth was an art museum, and then in 2015 it had a massive refurbishment. It's still an art museum, but it's a lot bigger. And it actually won the Museum of the Year in 2015 as well when it reopened. So it focuses on contemporary art exhibitions, and it's free entry. Actually, I think almost everything I mentioned so far has been free entry. That's kind of the beauty of England. The majority of museums are free to enter. Always a perk.
While you pause for a second, it looks like the Natural History Museum will reopen this summer or the summer of 2019.
Okay.
The Whitworth.
Yes, so they focus on contemporary art, and they often change focus. And they do have some quite, have events every now and again. So I think I went to one where there was a live music performance in the middle of the museum. And it's just, it's a lovely museum to go and visit if you're interested in modern art. Okay. And then the next one is a bit smaller. To be honest, it probably won't take you more than half an hour to walk around, but it's the Emmeline Pankhurst Centre. So Emmeline Pankhurst was the leader of the suffragette movement.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I don't know if the listeners know, but the suffragette movement was this movement by women to gain the women's right to vote in the UK or in England. And this happened in the sort of early 20th century. So Emmeline Pankhurst, this centre is basically where she lived in Manchester. So the opening hours are a bit awkward, so you should probably check it out before you go. But yeah, it's just nice to go in, have a look around. There's quite a lot of information about the movement and about Emmeline and her daughters as well. And there's also a little video you can watch about the movement. And yeah, I think because it was so dominated by her involvement in the suffragette movement, I think it's just a quite nice place to visit and learn a bit more about it. Once you've done that, you finish off your day. Hopefully you'll be here on a Sunday at some point, because England is known for the Sunday roast.
The Sunday roast.
It's a Sunday roast. I can't believe you haven't heard of the Sunday roast.
No, sorry. To me, that's going to Mom's house and she makes a roast on Sundays. So I think we're not talking about the same thing.
No, a Sunday roast is probably the most typical British meal you can have.
Okay. We are talking about that kind of roast, all right?
Yeah. So, a Sunday roast is basically this thing where British families sit down on a Sunday and have a roast. So it's roasted meat. It can be different types of meat: beef, pork, chicken, or a veggie version. Then you have it with roast potatoes, vegetables, a Yorkshire pudding, and gravy. It's so popular in the UK. I can't even begin to tell you how popular it is. To be fair, I had never heard of it until I moved to the UK, so I suppose it might not be that well known outside of the borders. But a lovely place to go if you do visit on a Sunday is the Refuge. So the Refuge is based in Palace Hotel, and it opened just a few years ago. There was a big sort of rebranding and rebuilding of the hotel. And it's a lovely environment, really beautiful building, and they serve really, really good food. So yeah, that's definitely a must if you visit the UK on a Sunday. You have to get a roast.
Okay.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
So when you've done that, you have your roast, you should go, and I know this is going to sound weird, so I'm pre-warning you, you should go to a pub called The Temple. So The Temple is, from the outside, it kind of looks like the entrance to a metro station, except Manchester doesn't have a metro line at all. So basically what it is, it's an old Victorian toilet.
Okay.
Yes, you walk down the stairs and it's been converted into a tiny, tiny pub. I mean, we're probably talking maybe 5 or 6 tables at most. But yeah, it's just a bit of a fun thing to do. And they do have quite a lot of beers. How often can you go to the pub in an old Victorian toilet?
One thing that I wanted to get back to, because I was looking up the dates for it, because I just learned this recently, and I thought it was surprising. You were talking about Emmeline Pankhurst, the suffragette. Mm-hmm. And so in the UK, women got the right to vote in 1918, which is very similar to a lot of countries. US was 1917. There were a few countries before it in Europe, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, that were, 1906 to 1950, all in that range. The thing that I just learned recently, though, is how long it took in some places. And that's what I was looking up. In Spain, women didn't get the right to vote till 31. In France, 44. In Belgium, Italy, Romania, and Yugoslavia, 46. Switzerland, not till 1971. We're now in my lifetime. And in Liechtenstein, 1984, which was the last country in Europe to give women the right to vote. So I don't know if you're thinking about this. This is my grandmother got the right to vote as an adult in the U.S., or she would have in the U.K., and yet my mother was born before people got the right to vote in some parts of Europe, and I was born, and my daughter was almost born before some of those places. So it really took a surprisingly long time, and so
definitely,
we really need to remember some of the people who really fought for this, and that it wasn't an easy struggle. It was not as obvious then as it seems to, I think, most of us, I would assume now.
Exactly. There was a movie about the suffragette movement a few years ago. I can't remember what it was called. But I know you mentioned 1918, but actually that was only for women over the age of 30.
Okay.
So in the UK or in England, if you were over 21, so between 21 and 30, you couldn't vote until 1928. So that took an extra 10 years for younger women to be allowed to vote. But it was actually, because the suffragettes here was seen as a quite militant organization.
It often came out of labor unions, which is probably why it would be involved, or there was a crossover at least in many places, and so probably why Manchester.
So I believe as well, one of the women who were part of the suffragettes, I hate a little bit, I don't know her name, actually stepped out in front of the King's horse at a racing, and she died as a result. But that was just part of the whole raising awareness of women's rights. It's quite sad. Right, so once you finished your night in the old Victorian toilet, then I suggest you stumble home to bed. And then the following day, you should head out to Salford. So Salford is still a city in its own right, but it's part of Greater Manchester.
Okay.
So this is where the Manchester Ship Canal used to originate from.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you've heard of the Manchester Ship Canal before.
I have, although I don't know a lot about it.
So the Manchester Ship Canal opened in 1894, and it was basically a way for Manchester to compete with Liverpool and be able to forego the tariffs that were placed on goods going through Liverpool So essentially, they just wanted to cut out the middlemen and have goods come straight into Manchester.
It turned it into a seaport, even though it's
Literally, yeah.
inland by a few miles.
Exactly, that's what they did. So it went in from the coast, obviously, and then used to stop in Salford. So obviously, the Manchester Ship Canal exists, but it doesn't go all the way in anymore.
Oh, okay.
It's not in use all the way into Salford, basically, because the ships got too big. What's happened now in Salford, especially Salford Quays, is that they are now regenerating as well. So again, you can see the theme going on here. And they're home to the Media City UK, which is where BBC have their head offices in North England. So obviously they're in London as well, but they're also in the north of England, and that's based in Salford Quays.
Okay, and when you say Quays, we're talking about the odd British spelling of Quays.
Yes, we are.
Okay, or wharf. Okay.
Yeah. So to get here, you can travel both by bus and tram from the city centre, so it's quite easy to get to. One of my favourite things to do out here is to go to the Lowry. So the Lowry is a big building that's dedicated to an artist called Ellis Lowry. So he was active during the 19th century, and he painted a lot of the industrial revolution scenes and, like I mentioned before, the conditions that people were living in, sort of everyday life around Salford. And he's got a quite distinctive style, the way he paints. I think it's referred to as a matchstick man style. And yeah, it's quite a favourite of mine, actually. I really like his style of painting. And I think it's a great way to depict industrial life. So they got a section of this building that's showing artwork that he's made. But it's also a performance building. So you have a lot of theatre, performances, musicals, things like that. So you can do both.
Okay.
And then once you've had a look around the Lowry, you should cross over the river and go to the Imperial War Museum North.
Okay.
So there's 5 Imperial War Museums around the UK, and 3 of them in London, and then there's one in Cambridgeshire, and then the 5th one is Manchester.
Did not know that. Okay.
It basically chronicles modern warfare, so it starts World War One onwards.
Okay.
What I find quite interesting about this museum is that they've actually designed it to make people feel uncomfortable. So basically, it's like you're supposed to feel a little bit disoriented as you walk around. So, for example, the floors aren't actually flat. They're a little bit skewed to make you feel a bit like something's wrong, if that makes sense. There's noises in the background. Yeah, it's quite interestingly done. You can also, when you're here, museum is free, but if you go up the lift of the buildings, it's quite a high building, and you can get a view of Salford, and that's a small fee, but you do get a nice view of the city from there.
Okay. My skeptic in me says there was this meeting where somebody was saying to the architect, this building that you designed makes me uncomfortable. He said, oh, yes, that was what we intended. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what happened, but it worked out for the book. Then the next one, I will admit, I haven't done this myself yet because I'm not overly interested in this show, but I thought it's still worth mentioning. So there is a TV show in the UK called Coronation Street.
Okay, heard of it.
It's really famous. I've never really watched it because I'm not that into soaps, but what you can do, though, is that quite a lot of it is actually filmed in the Salford Quays area. So you can go on a tour of the set. Yeah, and basically you can book onto the tour and you can have a look at the set where they filmed it. So it's been running since 1960, apparently, as a TV show, which is obviously a very long time for a TV show. So that's something you can do in this area as well. And then just to finish off, obviously Manchester is famous for football. So you have the 2 main teams. Obviously you've got Manchester United and then you've got Manchester City. So when you're in this area, you're actually within walking distance of Manchester United's stadium, Old Trafford.
Okay.
So what you can do is you can go for a tour of the grounds, and there's also a museum about the team. I can't say that I'm overly interested in football. I never have been, but I have actually been on this tour, and even I found it quite interesting. So I think when you're in Manchester, it's one of those things you probably should do, because it's, as a city, we're so associated with football. So it's kind of part of the city, really. Okay. But yeah, it's £25 for the tour in the museum if you're not a member of Manchester United. Not as a player, obviously, but as fun. I'm sure it's free if you're a player.
If you're a player, okay. I'll keep that in mind for my second career.
Yeah, if you want to be a football player, then probably get a free tour. All these activities will probably take you a day, perhaps even longer, so you might want to decide what you want to do that. Fifth day, so like I said before, I think you could easily spend 5 days in Manchester, and I'm sure you can see why. So on the fifth day, don't know if you're aware, but we actually have the third largest Chinatown in Europe
Did
in
not know
Manchester.
that. Okay.
No, there you go. So the largest is in Paris, and then the second biggest one's in London, and then it's Manchester being the third largest. So it's actually quite good when you come here for Chinese New Year because they do celebrations. They have sort of a parade, and it's quite a big celebration in the city. But yeah, you should have a look around in Chinatown. Some different restaurants you can have a nice meal in. And yeah, it's quite a nice area to just have a look around.
Okay.
And then within walking distance of Chinatown, you have Manchester Art Gallery. So again, this is free entry, and they focus on the pre-Raphaelites, so Victorian art.
Okay.
And they also, and this is my favourite actually, so they're part of the permanent exhibitions, but they do a lot of temporary exhibitions, and they're usually pretty good. And they generally tend to focus on more modern art, but yeah, they've got some really good temporary exhibitions. And then once you've had a look in the museum, you should head over to Canal Street. So Canal Street is sort of the hub of the LGBTQ community in Manchester.
Okay.
But one of the really nice things to do here is to go for afternoon tea. So on one of the sort of back streets in this area, you have a place called Richmond Tea Rooms.
Okay.
So Richmond Tea Rooms is basically this Alice in Wonderland themed cafe restaurant
Okay.
where you can have an afternoon tea. And it's, like I said, it's on a back street, so if you don't know it's there, you're not going to find it. So yeah, it's one of those, it's a nice little find, and it's really lovely inside, even though you really can't tell from the outside. Once you've had your afternoon tea, I mean, it's up to you. Like I said, you can go either for a tour of Manchester United or you can go to Manchester City. So if you're in the Salford area, it's really easy to go to the United Stadium, whereas Manchester City, quite ironically, is on the completely opposite end of the city.
Okay.
You have United is kind of in the southwest, I'd say, whereas Manchester City is in the east of the city. So you can get a tram out to Manchester City Stadium. It's one of the stops. And you can also get a tour of their stadium, and it's also £25. So it just depends which football team you want to visit, basically.
Okay.
And then just to sort of round up your few days in Manchester, I think you should go for a gig. I'm not overly interested in music history. I like listening to music. I don't know a great deal about the history of it. But again, it's something that Manchester's really linked to. So you had really famous bands starting in Manchester, such as the Smiths and Oasis. We had an infamous nightclub called the Hacienda. And there's still to this day so many venues in Manchester where you can go and just listen to music. So a few of them, you have the Manchester Academy, you have a place called Jimmy's, the Deaf Institute, and there's also quite a new place called Yes.
Okay.
So there's a few different places. There is a place called Matt and Fred. So this isn't really the kind of music that Manchester has historically associated with, but it's a jazz bar. So you can basically, a few nights a week, you can go for a free gig and just sit and listen to jazz live bands. It's quite nice.
Excellent. Now, you have lived there for 8 years, I think you said?
I have, yeah.
So you have been there in all seasons. Is there a particular day of the year, a festival or something, that Manchester is the place to be? In all of England, you'd rather be in Manchester?
Oh, every day of the year. No, joke aside. We do have a really big Pride Parade.
Okay.
So August, there's a big celebration. As I mentioned before, we have quite a large LGBTQ community.
So whether you want to be there in that town on that day or don't want to be in town on that day, that'd be a good thing to know. Okay.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, depending on whatever you prefer there. But yeah, they do have a good parade. I mean, it's huge. It'll probably take about an hour and a half just for the whole thing to pass by.
Oh my, okay. That's
it's
big.
massive. And then, I mean, the Chinese New Year is quite nice to come and have a look at the celebrations. I mean, any football game is always popular.
Okay.
I'd usually avoid the city centre when those are on, but if you're into your football, then you should go.
Excellent. Anything else we should talk about in Manchester before we get to some of our wrap-up questions?
I just wanted to mention a couple of the day trips that you can do. So as mentioned before, you have the Manchester Ship Canal.
Yep.
So even though it's closed down to commercial trade, not all of it, but big parts of it is, you can actually go on a ferry the whole way down to Liverpool from Manchester.
Oh, fun. Okay.
So it's a full day trip, but you can go from Salford Quays all the way to Liverpool. and it's £44. It does book up very far in advance, so you have to sort of book in advance, but it's a lovely day out, especially if it's sort of sunny.
Okay.
And they do tell you a little bit about the canal as you travel down it. So yeah, that's quite interesting.
And you say if it's sunny, when is the best time of year to come to Manchester?
You usually seem to have a small heat wave round about sort of now, May time.
Okay.
But if you want the highest chance of sun, I'd probably say July, August.
Okay.
I think the thing with Manchester is that because of its location, the weather is incredibly unpredictable. So every time you leave the house, I usually always have my sunglasses and my umbrella in the same bag because you just never know.
Okay, good to know.
It's because we're located next to the Peak District.
Yeah.
So the Peak District is this area of nature where you have loads of great walks you can go.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, you need to have a car to be able to travel to a lot of these places.
Okay.
But one I want to mention that I've been on is the Speedwell Cavern, which is basically an old lead mine that was open for about 20 years because it wasn't very financially successful. But you can go on a guided tour in it. So you basically travel down the mine shaft in a boat. And it's very claustrophobic, so if you don't like confined spaces...
Travel down the mine shaft in a boat.
Yeah, so when I say the mine shaft, you do sort of walk downstairs first, and then it's flat, so obviously the boat can travel.
Huh.
So you go through it, and then in the end, there's a big limestone cave where you can see they've sort of been digging out. But yeah, it's interesting. And then afterwards, when you come back up again, there's a hill next to it called Mamtor, so Mamtor, and you can go up and just have a look at the views.
Okay. And Tor would just be the Celtic word for hill, as I recall.
Might be.
I think so. There's a joke, and I don't even know if it's true, that there was a hill somewhere in England that is Carn Tormont Hill, which is in the 4 different languages that were spoken in the region over time, hill, 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 hill. But
Right.
so that's the only reason that I remember that is being the word for hill. And I don't know if that's a true story or not, so you'll have to fact check me there, listeners. Excellent. If you're standing in the prettiest spot in Manchester, where are you standing and what are you looking at?
One of my favourite areas in terms of pretty is actually in the suburbs of Manchester.
Okay.
So it's a place called Fletcher's Moss.
Fletcher's Moss.
Fletcher's Moss Gardens.
Okay.
Yes.
I just love English names.
It's basically Fletcher Moss Park and then Parsonage Gardens.
Fletcher Moss Park, okay.
I think because, like I said before, I'm from Sweden, and one of the things I really miss when I live in the city is big green areas, because I'm from a quite small place. And this is basically what Fletcher Moss gives me. It's a big green area in the South Manchester, and you have a botanical garden, and it's just a beautiful green space to go.
One thing that makes you laugh out loud and say only in Manchester?
Probably the amount of carbs that a meal can contain.
Okay.
I know that sounds really random, but I mean, I've learned about foods that I just didn't think people put together. So one thing that comes to mind is something we call a chip bomb.
Okay.
So a chip would basically be
French fries.
Yeah. French fries, yeah, but thicker.
Right.
So you got these thick chips, and then bomb is basically a bread roll. So you're basically putting the French fries into a roll of bread and eating that. It's just carbs and carb. And I find it very funny.
Okay. I don't know that I'll order one of those when I get there, but
No, it's not for me, but yeah.
Excellent.
I love the carbs.
Our guest again has been Helena Ringstrom from fountainoftravel.com. And Helena, if we wanted to send someone to your best post on Manchester at fountainoftravel.com, where are we going to send them?
I have a post that's called 29 Free Things to Do in Manchester. So, yeah, basically 29 free things to do.
Excellent. Well, Helena, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Manchester.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
In news of the community, I heard recently from Ryan, who said, I wanted to thank you and guest Justin Barnes for providing a great amount of insight back on episode 629, Travel to the Big Island of Hawaii. My family and I traveled there back in March, and we ended up getting to experience several of the suggestions made during the show. We especially enjoyed the Place of Refuge National Park, horseback riding through Waipo Valley, and Papakolea green sand beach. We even were lucky enough to swim with dolphins after renting a kayak at Kealakekua Bay in Captain Cook. A tip for anyone who is planning to visit the Big Island and hopes to swim with or even just kayak along next to dolphins without paying for an expensive tour is to keep an eye on the weather forecast. Plan to go on a warm, sunny day. We ended up going twice, striking out the first day, which was overcast. Get there before they open at 7 a.m. so you don't have to wait while others fill out paperwork and prep, because if there, the dolphins typically only stay in the bay for an hour or two, and you could miss out if there's a line. One suggestion, for which Justin was spot on, was to stay several nights on each side of the island, Hilo and Kona. It really helps to map out and group together destinations, making the most of your time on the island. Even after listening to the podcast, I was surprised how large the island is and how long it can take to get from one side to the other. Thanks for the great context each week. I know it takes quite a bit of effort to produce a weekly show, and I appreciate it, Ryan. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. It's always great to know it's appreciated and used. You were talking about the island being bigger than you expected. I missed my travel trivia quiz this week, which said, what is the biggest island in the U.S.? And I guessed Long Island, which is 100 miles long. But no, the Big Island of Hawaii is the largest island in the USA. So it is indeed a big place. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, just like Ryan did, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.